And let me show no new comments. Today I would like to go through some comments and suggestions that were posted in the last 3 weeks, and I would like to talk about the last minute changes. So one of the last minute changes was the restoration or adding or enhancing the support for Photoshop plugins. And in the 64-bit version this menu item did not work because the support for Photoshop plugins was limited to 32-bit plugins. So in the final version that you can download now, this also works in the 64-bit version, but if you want to use Photoshop plugins with RWPaint, then you have to download the correct version of the plugin. And if you are using 64-bit version of RWPaint, you have to download 64-bit version of the plugin. And if you are using 32-bit version, you need to have 32-bit version of the plugin. So you cannot mix those two. But you can now use this in the 64-bit version. Another small change was this one. You can convert some vector shapes to polygons. It's not very useful, but sometimes it can be useful. And there are some minor bug fixes related to support for tablets with pressure sensors. So this one is only supported in raster layers, and with the brush tool I have a pressure sensitive tablet here. You cannot see it, but you can see that when I draw with my brush here, depending on how much force I use, then the size and the flow is controlled by the pressure sensor on the pencil. And this should also work with tablets that have a pressure sensitive touch screen. You usually need to have a special pencil that has the pressure sensor in the tip. So this should work in the final version if you in a raster layer if you have one of these. So okay. So I am not sure whether it is useful to go through all the new features in this new version, but let's do it quickly. We now support layer groups. You can select a bunch of layers and put them in a group. The group acts as a layered image. So the layers inside the group are merged first, and then they are merged with other layers. You may find this useful. You can apply layer styles on this layer group. Layer styles are visible in the new version in this layers panel, and configuration of each effect is here. And some of the effects can be also controlled with control handles directly on the canvas. When you are done, adjusting the configuration of the selected effect. You can either select the layer manually, or you can, for example, click on this done button and it will select the layer for you, and then you can continue editing the layer. In the new version we have more operations that you can do with vector objects. For example, I can convert this to a shape, this text. You can see that now I can control individual parts of this vector object. This is now still one object, but you can decompose it, and now it's individual parts that you can move around as you see fit. You can do Boolean operations if you select more than one part. For example, like this. If I select these two, then I can, for example, turn them into a single object. Now it's a single object, and you can see that the outline is optimized, let's say optimized. Okay, there are some new effects, and layer styles can be added to layers directly from this menu. We have removed the layer properties panel that used to be here, and that was used for controlling the opacity of the layer and the blending mode of the layer. Opacity is now a regular layer style, so I can enable it here, and then I can control the opacity of this layer. And because it's not used that often, it's not occupying space on the screen all the time, only when you actually want to use opacity with a certain layer. And this button here can be used to select the blending mode for the layer. So we have saved some space. Also recently I have moved this list of objects. It used to be above this panel here, and it looked like this collapsible panel, and now it's at the bottom and stays always visible. If you open it, you can adjust its size, and if you don't want to use it, you can hide it. And this way this editing panel looks very similar for vector layers. This is a vector layer, and for raster layers you always have the properties of the selected tool here at the top, and then under it you have either color, or if it's for example a tool that supports other fill style than just solid color, you can select the fill style here, and possibly also outline. So in the new version you can control the position of the outline. You can put it outside of the selected region. You can center it. This is the default for all I think all other editing software, and you can put it inside. This was the only option in the older version of RWPaint or cursor editor, and it is a default right now. But if you are, for example, trying to be as much compatible with SVG as possible, then you should be using this centered outline position, because SVG only supports centered outlines. Let me check comments quickly. No new comments. So SVG support is one of the enhancements in this version. You can now import I would say majority of SVG files that you can find around the web. Certainly SVG files that are used for simple graphics like icons or buttons and such. Okay, I don't need to mention that the icons, almost all the icons were redesigned and they now work in any resolution. If you are using a 4K monitor display and are using, for example, 200% resolution, everything should be sized correctly and it should be smooth or sharp. Okay, that's it for RWPaint. Let's look quickly on the cursor editor. In the cursor editor, you have now the option to use vector layers, and the default will be still raster layers because people are used to it and it may confuse newbie users, but advanced users should probably start using vector layers when they are creating their cursors, because that gives you more flexibility. For example, when I use these wizards and my cursor has a vector layer, it will generate the arrow shape as a vector, and that makes it much easier for me to adjust it manually. Let me, for example, do this. I will duplicate this frame and I will, let me do, for example, I will delete this arrow in this second frame and I will generate it an arrow with much smaller tail, like this, for example. So I have now a simple animated cursor with short and long tail, and with this new function here I can generate some intermediate frames, and you now can see that it has generated, that doesn't look very good, but it's, sorry for that, the gradient was reset. Let me copy the gradient. This is a problem that sometimes occurs. Okay, let's fix it. Okay, it will be wrong on all these frames. Maybe let's just don't click on them, because it is a problem with the click because of some complicated synchronization of states. Okay, let me select these 5. I will copy them and paste them. It will copy them wrongly. Okay. It has forgotten the gradient because I've used the clipboard. This shouldn't be really happening. Oh, okay. So now we have a cursor that grows and shrinks its tail, and maybe I can make it faster. So and maybe reverse these frames, and now we have a cursor that increases and shortens its tail. So it was just an example of how to do quickly animation with vector layers. One more thing that we have in the cursor editor is better support for larger cursors. I can type any sizes I want here, up to 256 pixels, but for example 128, 64, 48 and 32. If I want to create cursor using these sizes, I can just type them here and create them, and then let's generate this arrow again. It will generate all these sizes, and this window is now better. It automatically scrolls and allows you to select all these sizes. Okay, we also have support for the location select and person select. These two roles were added in Windows 10, if I'm not wrong. So you should be able to create cursors for any Windows using this new version more comfortably. It was possible to create larger cursors in the old version, but if you had too many sizes, you would have to resize this window like I just did, because otherwise it would not scroll and you wouldn't be able to select all these sizes. Also, the layers panel was moved here. Previously it was elsewhere. What else is new? We have a new wizard for this spinning wheel. We have this stroke tool that is new in cursor editor, also in Paint. And yeah, I think that's it. Not this one. We have new commands. Vector layers were added to cursor editor in this version. I wanted to go through some suggestions here in this. It was here. So more batch operations for real world paint. Let's go there. Batch operations are also new in this version, and here are some default operations that I think can be useful for everyone, but you can add new manually. You can create new batch operations here, and I will also enhance this page. There are some old batch operations that you can download. I will add new operations here when someone requests a concrete operation, because I can add whatever I want, but I'm not sure whether it is useful. So if you have a scenario for something that is useful, just and And if you are unable to configure the operation yourself, then just write to me and I will configure it for you. And you can then import it. When you download something from that web page, you can click on import and just import that file. Right now you can resize images, convert image formats, add watermarks. This will extract layers from a layered image and save each layer as an individual file. It will fix contrast in a photo, convert photo to grayscale or colorize your photo. And if you just select colorize and just apply it to some file, and it will show you a user interface and colorize that image. And if you select, goes here, and you can see that the blue-gray color I have just selected was added to this list. And if you select one of these sub configuration and double click the file, it will not, the configuration dialog will not pop out, and it will just convert it to whatever was configured there. And this applies to many of these pre-configured batch operations, and also to yours if the operation that is used there supports descriptions for its configuration. It will simply list the 5 recently used options here, and it will not ask you what. It will not show the configuration dialog for you. There seems to be a comment there. I think that's not relevant. Later. So that's what I wanted to say to batch operations. You can, if you want to configure a new, I think there was one of the oldest streams there where I described how to configure batch operation in much more details. Let's go. Keep text document feature in the that was in the release candidate. I think yes. You can use this very primitive text editor in RWPaint. It can be useful when you want to, for example, look at an SVG file. I don't have an SVG file, colors SVG. You can select it here and you can then open it as text, and it will show you the file as text. Whether as compared, when you just double click it, it will open it as a vector image. So that can be useful. The text editor is focused on Unicode files. It should be able to recognize other encodings and automatically convert them to Unicode, but yeah, that may not always work. So that's the text editing. Customizable keyboard shortcuts. This feature is already somehow in the current version. Let's look at it. Let's create an image, and for example, we will try to configure some keyboard shortcuts. So first thing you have to do is you have to enable layout configurations, that will add these 3 new items to the tools menu, and then we go to configure layout. And then you probably want to go to menu configuration and find the command that you are interested in. Let's, for example, go to this style menu. So this is this one, you can see it's style menu. And you click and it zooms in for you, and you can see that it consists of this list of items that produce the content of the menu, the actual content. Some of it is not a one-to-one correspondence, because, for example, some of these items will display multiple menu commands if there are, for example, more effects in a category. And you can click on these items which represent the individual image effects that are available, and you can see that, for example, this shadow command has a Ctrl D in the parenthesis here. When I click here in this window and, for example, click Ctrl G, it will change the accelerator key for this command. So when I click on Ctrl D, it will, and when I just click Ctrl, it will remove the accelerator. So let's get it back to Ctrl D, and if I, for example, add Ctrl M, for example, for this projected shadow, let's click OK, and you can see that Ctrl M is now here. Let me quickly draw something and click on Ctrl M, and you can see that it has added this projected shadow as a layer style, and I can configure it here. So this is how you can configure keyboard shortcuts for this concrete menu. Let's look at, let's first add a raster layer, and for example, you can see this P accelerator here in the parentheses. So when I have focus here, you can see that the pencil tool is active, and now I click on P, and it will make the rectangle tool active. When I click on P again, it will cycle through this menu. So we have moved from rectangle to rectangle with effects, and you can see that it draws a rectangle with this shadow under it, and the P will cycle through all these shapes and these tools that are in this P group. And how you can customize this, you can right click on this toolbar, click on configure toolbar. You can also find this section of the layout configuration in the complete configuration that we were visiting before, but if you are configuring this toolbar, you can just go here, and this text configures which drawing tools are in the toolbar, and you can see their IDs, so magic wand and select with this whole group in the square bracket is this first button here, and you can see the square bracket ends here, and you can see that in the normal parenthesis after this square bracket it has the S key, and this is the accelerator for this select group. And when you move around here, you can see that there is an X accelerator, keyboard accelerator for this second group, and so on. Here is a crop tool, this is the scissors icon, the shapeshift tool, and so on. And you can see that some of these have accelerators, some don't, because the number of letters is not infinite. But you can see you can customize these accelerators for these drawing tools like this. And let's now look how to customize accelerators for these image effects. So let's go again to tools and configure layout, and now we have to find the menu items that are not the menu items, but the configuration items that are configuring holding the configuration for these menu items. And I know where it is, but you may have to spend some time looking for it. It is here. This is this item holds these 4 submenus, and they are only visible when you are working with a raster image. The second, item number 6 is holding items that are visible when you are editing a vector layer, and this conditional item shouldn't be here, that is for 3D layers. But this adjust and effects sub-items are only visible when we are working with raster layers. So let's go here. Here is a adjust pop-up menu, or this whole group, and we have to navigate to something. Here is, for example, the levels item, and you can see it has a shortcut accelerator here. So you have to find the configuration of this menu item, and here you can customize the accelerator by simply clicking in this field and then pressing the accelerator. So for example, let's use Ctrl J. I'm not sure. You can also, for example, hold and press and hold Shift and Ctrl and then click on J, and it will tell you that the new accelerator is now Ctrl Shift J. So I have clicked OK, and you can see that the new accelerator is now shown here, and when I click on Ctrl Shift J, it will run this levels effect. So this is how you can configure some of the accelerators. Not everything is configurable, because for example these are commonly used in almost every application, and these are hard-coded. So Ctrl Z, Ctrl Y, Ctrl X, and so on for clipboard operation. Actually, Ctrl X, for example, is the cut command, Ctrl Z, but Shift Delete is an alternate accelerator. Now I have now pressed Shift Delete, and it is also an accelerator for cut. It's just not shown here. So you cannot customize every accelerator, but you can customize all that are functional in that do something useful or something related to the actual editor, like applying effects and so on. These are also hard-coded, or are they? I think they are hard-coded. Okay, that was this. Do something with this PS filter. I have already talked about it. The Photoshop filter is now working in the 64-bit version. Fix the issue where you can select something in a canvas and try to rotate it. It rotates the entire canvas. Well, let's see whether it is fixed or not. Maybe it's not. Probably not. But the intention here is that you rotate it like this when you have a selection, that you don't use the menu command. Option to trim the entire image by grouping every empty space, leaving only the image data in. So this function is already in the application. It is called remove border here. You can also configure whether you want the result to be square or not. So in this default configuration, the result is not square, it's 583 pixels times 511, but I have now undone the operation. If you click on square, then it will leave some borders. It's now 583 times 583, and if in this default state, when you do not require the result to be square, then no borders are left, but you can, for example, want to the content, the actual content, to only occupy 90% of the canvas, and you can now also choose that you want to, you can position the where do you want the content to be, for example like this, and now the content will occupy the 90% of the resulting canvas. You can see that the empty spaces are now on the top and on the left. So this should do what you want it to do. In cursor editor, customizable keyboard shortcuts, the same applies to cursor editor. Add 3D support. Well, I will talk about this later. More generators. Eyes on writing cursor. Well, maybe later, maybe. These wizards are actually JavaScript, so you can configure them yourself and add. So you can go to the configuration, and this is the code that actually is all plus this one. This controls how the configuration of the wizard is looking like, and this controls this creates the shape. So you can potentially create new wizards yourself. You will need some knowledge, know how to do some JavaScript coding and read some documentation, or study how these wizards work. Okay, add custom option to support center cursor with weak setting. I'm not sure what to do with that. If you have some problematic cursors that you cannot open with the cursor editor, please send them to me and I will look at them and probably add some compatibility code that will be able to open them. What all effects and styles from RWPaint? Well, I don't think that's necessary. RWPaint has more styles, but they are used for example, for editing photographs and such, and that is not the goal of the cursor editor. I think it's better to have the cursor editor simpler and not confuse people too much. This is already maybe too much. Fixed issue where I'm unable to view and use layers panels. Oh, I think that's fixed. Okay, so let's look at the comments. We have many comments here. Sorry, I do not have a second monitor functioning right now, but I hope I didn't miss any questions. So I want to talk about the future. I want to release the source code for the majority of real-world paint. It should be on the web soon, and you will be able to download it here. This link doesn't work right now, the RWPaint source, but it will work later. And you can right now download the installer using this button. It should detect your Windows version, and if you are running on 64-bit version of Windows, it should suggest the 64-bit version for you. But you can also download the portable version, the 64-bit portable version, 32-bit version installer are portable here. The same applies to the cursor editor. One more thing I wanted to say: if you are using the older version, you should uninstall all plugins before you upgrade to the new version, because the plugins are not 100% compatible. But you can also delete them manually later. If you don't know how, you can go to %updata, and in that folder you can find the real world subfolder and real world cursor editor, for example. Go to plugins, and if you have something here, you can delete it manually later. Okay. And about the future, so I will upload the source code for real-world paint, and it will be available under GPL license. Later this will change a bit, and individual components will have more or less permissible licenses. And I will now start working on the icon editor. And in the future, the icon editor will not contain 3D module. It will be just raster and vector images, and it will be free. And I will release a Real-World Designer application that will contain the 3D module, and it will be able to create icons, cursors, images, all application in one. So that's the plan for the future. So if there are comments, so type them now, otherwise we will finish the stream in a couple of minutes. So I will wait a bit for the questions, if there are any. Did I forget anything? I hope not. Regarding the 64 and 32-bit versions, if you want to use both of them, I would recommend you to use the portable versions. You should not install both 64 and 32-bit version, because the configuration will be, they will both be using the same configuration, and they both will be using the same folder for plugins, and the plugins for 32 and 64-bit versions are different, so it will not work correctly. You should only install one of them, or just use the portable version. It's more convenient anyway, and it stores the configuration in a subfolder of where you have unzipped it, and you don't have to install it. And it's, in my opinion, it's better not to install the application and just use the portable version. You can put it on a USB drive or just on your desktop or wherever you want. Also, one more thing, the installer for both of these applications, as well as the main executable files, should now be digitally signed, and you should not see an unknown, Windows should not tell you that is from an unknown author, but it should show you my name when you try to install it or run it for the first time. So it seems there are no questions. In that case, I will thank you for being here, and please check out the new version and let me know if you find any major problems. And next stream will be as usual in 3 weeks, and I hope to talk about the icon editor next. Maybe there will be a preview already available, I'm not sure. There probably will be a preview, but I'm not sure how capable it will be. So thank you for watching, and see you in 3 weeks.